Hello, and welcome back to the Striha Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Parker Striha, and on today's episode, we are going to be discussing my first 2022 NFL mock draft. I'm by no means a professional, but I do love talking about sports, so thank you for joining me. So this will be the first of probably a couple mock drafts that I put up on the channel from now until the draft happens at the end of April. I don't really have the ability to watch a lot of film on a lot of these players, so I kind of go off of what I think about them, combine stuff, what I hear from other people, and I won't be able to give super in-depth talks on every single player in the draft, but I will do my best to kind of explain why I have each team selecting the player that they are picking. This mock draft will have no trades. It'll just be pick 1 to 32. The draft order that is set for every team, and I'm just kind of going to go from there. So with the first overall pick in the 2022 NFL Draft, I have the Jacksonville Jaguars selecting Aiden Hutchinson, the edge from Michigan. Aiden Hutchinson was arguably the best defensive end in the entire college football world this year. He was the centerpiece of that Michigan defense, and I think if with the Jacksonville Jaguars putting the franchise tag on Cam Robinson and hopefully re-signing him to a long-term deal, the likelihood of Evan Neal being the first overall pick does go down, but I think if that does happen, they did put the franchise tag on Cam Robinson today, so I think the possibility of Evan Neal being the first pick went down dramatically. So I think they're going to take the best edge rusher available to try to bolster up that defense. And head coach Doug Peterson, I think, really understands and really values the defensive and offensive lines, because when he was in Philly, that Super Bowl year they had, their defensive line was outstanding. So I think they're going to get a top-tier defensive end in Aiden Hutchinson. With the number 2 overall pick, I have the Detroit Lions selecting Kayvon Thibodeaux, the edge rusher from Oregon. Like Aiden Hutchinson, Thibodeaux is arguably the top. I think those two can go back. You can go back and forth with those two being the top edge rusher this year. Thibodeaux was the consensus number 1 overall pick for this draft for a long time, I think, but he didn't really produce this year. And then the combine, I think he didn't do as good, or he didn't do as well as a lot of people probably expected him to do. So I think if Aiden Hutchinson goes number 1 overall, I think Detroit is going to run this card up to Roger Goodell, and they're going to select Kayvon Thibodeaux, give them a top-tier edge rusher for Dan Campbell, and I think he's going to fall in love. I think this pick instantly makes that team better, and for a team that I think is so derived of talent, they'd be stupid not to draft a guy like Thibodeaux. With the number 3 overall pick, I have the Houston Texans selecting Evan Neal from the University of Alabama. He is an offensive tackle. The guy is 6'5", I believe, 337 pounds, and there's barely an ounce of fat on the guy. He's an animal. He's a freak. I think he's easily 1A or 1B when it comes to offensive tackles in this year's draft. And obviously the Texans do already have Laramie Tunsil at left tackle, but you don't want to miss a guy like Evan Neal when your team is just so bad. You need to get as much talent as you can and as much premium talent, and I think they'd be really stupid not to take a guy like Evan Neal, who, whether you play him at left or right tackle, is going to be a stalwart of that offense for years to come. With the number 4 overall pick, I have the New York Jets selecting Ike Ekwonu, the offensive tackle from NC State. Like Evan Neal, he's arguably the best tackle in the class, except their play styles are a little bit different. Ekwonu, I think, is more of a mauler. He's more of a running guy, more of a run-first offense. I think he's a better run blocker than he is a pass blocker, but he's still an amazing offensive tackle. The Jets, I've heard, aren't super sold on Mekhi Becton as of right now, but even if they are, bringing in a guy like Ekwonu who can slide to right tackle or even at guard potentially just helps them protect their franchise quarterback and Zach Wilson, because they already have Mekhi Becton and Elijah Vera Tucker. So bring in good young offensive linemen, and that team has potential to be good in the future. I don't know how far in the future, but I think Ekwonu is a no-brainer pick for the Jets at 4. With the number 5 overall pick, I have the New York Giants selecting Travon Walker, the edge rusher from Georgia. Out of a lot of these players that I have in the mock draft, I think Walker probably raised his stock the most. Being 6'5", 271 pounds, and running as fast as he did, teams are going to value that. And with a team like the Giants not really having a lot in their front seven for pass rush, other than maybe Leonard Williams and Dexter Lawrence and Azeez Ojulari, I think bringing in a guy like Travon Walker instantly raises the ceiling of that defense just because of his athleticism. There's no reason not to draft him. He's arguably the 3rd best edge rusher in this class. And with edge being probably one of your team's biggest needs, take him. The worst thing that could happen is you don't get an offensive lineman until the next round or something. So just make your team better right now, because I think Brian Daboll, he's going to want, I don't know how he's going to really build his team, but if I'm him, I'm trying to just build a good overall team. And for a team that's been really bad for the past 5 or 6 years, just get good players, because eventually you'll have a good team, hopefully. With the 6th overall pick, I have the Carolina Panthers taking Charles Cross, an offensive tackle from Mississippi State. Now, Cross is probably the 3rd best offensive tackle in this draft class, and he's probably the best pass blocker. So I think Carolina, who's a team that really needs a left tackle, this is a no-brainer for them. They already have Taylor Moton at right tackle, so go out, get Cross. He can be the blindside protector for Sam Darnold or whoever your quarterback is going to be this year, and he can help pave the way for a guy like Christian McCaffrey in the backfield. With the 7th overall pick, I have the New York Giants selecting Ahmad Sauce Gardner, a cornerback from Cincinnati. Gardner, I think, secured the number 1 corner spot in this year's draft with the showing he put out during the combine. At 6'3", he had unreal speed, and I don't think you really see that with guys as tall as he is at the cornerback position. So I think with the Giants, who might be looking to trade a guy like James Bradbury, if they bring in a guy like Gardner, he can instantly slide in and be their number 1 corner on that team. And for the Giants, who are in a division with teams that have guys like Devontae Smith or Terry McLaurin or CeeDee Lamb, they need a guy that can go up against those receivers for the next decade or so. And I think, like I said, I think he's the best corner in the draft, so there's no reason not to take him. Like with Travon Walker, just take good players to hopefully mold together, hopefully make that team better in general, because I think they need it. With the 8th overall pick, I have the Atlanta Falcons selecting Garrett Wilson, a wide receiver from Ohio State. The news broke yesterday or a couple days ago that Calvin Ridley is going to be suspended for the entire year for betting on NFL games last season. So that really leaves a massive hole in the Atlanta Falcons receiving core. They don't really have a receiver that I trust, like a pure receiver. Obviously, Kyle Pitts is great, but he's a tight end. So I think they need to get a receiver that whatever quarterback they have can rely on. And I think Garrett Wilson, who really had a great showing at the combine, is probably going to be wide receiver 1 this year. So I think the Falcons would be really wise to draft him. And then if they do keep Calvin Ridley after his suspension, I think that's a really good 1-2 pairing for whatever quarterback they have after Matt Ryan. Number 9, I have the Seattle Seahawks selecting Jermaine Johnson, the edge rusher from Florida State, a former Georgia Bulldog who transferred to Florida State to get more playing time. Came out, had a great year, had a great Senior Bowl, was absolutely dominant, and then had an amazing combine. I think he really, really cemented himself as a top 15 and now a top 10 pick in this mock draft. The Seahawks need help on that defensive line, and I think a guy like Jermaine Johnson can be a really huge piece of that defense for years to come. That team is probably going to be going into more of a rebuild this year. So just get a guy in there, let him go out there, let him do what he has to do, let him ball out, let him learn, and then hopefully you'll have in a couple years a top tier defensive end for your team. At number 10, I have the New York Jets selecting Kyle Hamilton, a safety from Notre Dame. A guy who was once projected to go probably top 5 has now fallen to 10 in my mock draft. Safeties just aren't super valued when it comes to the draft. And I think if he's still available at 10, the New York Jets are running this card up to Roger Goodell. Marcus May is potentially going to leave in free agency, and that team overall I just don't think has a lot of talent. So there's no reason not to bring in a 6'4 safety with legitimate speed and athleticism who can help instantly turn that defense around. At number 11, I have the Washington Commanders taking Kenny Pickett, a quarterback from Pittsburgh. Pickett is arguably the best quarterback in this draft. You can go back and forth with him and Malik Willis or Matt Corral, but I think Washington really needs a quarterback, and they've said they're going to be super active and super aggressive this year in the quarterback market. So instead of potentially having a guy that they want get poached from them, I don't see any reason why they shouldn't take Kenny Pickett at 11. Get their guy, let Ron Rivera work with him, and they could potentially have their franchise quarterback for the next 10 to 15 years. With the number 12 overall pick, I have the Minnesota Vikings selecting Derek Stingley Jr., a cornerback from LSU. Stingley at one point was arguably the best corner in this draft. He was seen as probably a top 2, top 3 pick. Hasn't really performed very well since his freshman season. And then with him not competing at the combine this year, his draft stock has really fallen in my opinion, and a lot of other people's opinions actually. So I think for a team like Minnesota that really has not a lot at their cornerback position, bringing in a top-tier athlete, a top-tier corner like Stingley, who could easily develop into one of, if not the best corner in the league in a few years, is a no-brainer. Just make that defense better. They're a team that for years has thrived on having a top-tier defense. So if they can get a number 1 corner, I think that instantly boosts what that team can do in the future. With the 13th overall pick, I have the Cleveland Browns selecting Chris Olave, wide receiver from Ohio State. Like Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave came out and killed the combine, and Cleveland doesn't really have a lot at wide receiver. They got rid of Odell Beckham Jr. last year. There's talks that they're going to get rid of Jarvis Landry, and then really that leaves them with Anthony Schwartz and Donovan Peoples-Jones. I like both of those guys, but I don't think either of them are a number 1 receiver. So bring in Olave, who is a really smooth, really crisp route runner. He just instantly makes that team better. And it gives Baker Mayfield, or whoever their quarterback is, a reliable weapon. With the number 14 overall pick, I have the Baltimore Ravens selecting Trevor Penning, an offensive tackle from Northern Iowa. Penning, like a lot of these guys, he came out and he performed super well at the combine, and I think he cemented his place as a top 15 pick, is the 4th best offensive tackle in this class, in my opinion. And Baltimore, I think, just needs offensive linemen. They need to protect Lamar Jackson if they want him to last in the league. And I think Penning is that guy. He can slide in and instantly be their starting left or right tackle, depending on what they want to do with Ronnie Stanley. So I think this is a no-brainer. They run that card up and they get their starting left or right tackle of the future. With the 15th overall pick, I have the Philadelphia Eagles selecting Devontae Wyatt, a defensive tackle from Georgia. Now, I thought about giving them Jordan Davis, but I think he is more of a run stuffer than a pure pass rusher. And I think Devontae Wyatt is a really good pass rusher. He's super athletic, super fast, and his combine showed that. He had the fastest 40-yard time for defensive tackles. So for a team like Philadelphia, who could potentially be looking to move on from Fletcher Cox soon, bringing in a guy like Devontae Wyatt, who can be your next Fletcher Cox, I think that really helps the ceiling of that team. It really raises the ceiling, and that team has had historically good defensive lines for the past however many years. And I don't know what Nick Sirianni really wants to do with that team, but I don't see any reason why he shouldn't take a top tier prospect like Devontae Wyatt and just slide him in next to a guy like Javon Hargrave or Josh Sweat. Slide him in there, let him go, let him play, and you might have arguably a top 10 defensive tackle in the league in 2-3 years. At number 16, I have the Philadelphia Eagles selecting Daxton Hill, a safety from Michigan. Now this, depending on who you ask, is probably super early for Daxton Hill, but I really liked him coming out of Michigan. He has some really good flexibility between safety and corner, and I think for Philadelphia, a team that doesn't really have a lot at safety and doesn't really have a lot at corner, bringing in a guy in that can play both positions if need be, or can be really good at one or the other, I think that instantly just makes that defense better. The team, I like some of the pieces on that defense, but they just need to bring in good prospects. A guy like Daxton Hill can instantly improve the back end of that defense, or could go along well in the nickel alongside a guy like Darius Slay. With the 17th overall pick, I have the Los Angeles Chargers selecting Jordan Davis, a defensive tackle from Georgia. He's 6'6", 341 pounds. The guy is a mountain of a man. And for the Chargers, who are really, really bad at stopping the run, they need a guy like Jordan Davis to come in there and plug up holes and just take blocks from other guys. Like if there's 2 or 3 linemen going at Davis just because of how big he is, that frees up space for Uchenna Nwosu. It frees up space for Joey Bosa. So I think he goes in and he can really help that defense. And he really helps the Chargers, who, if they can't stop the run, I don't think they're going to get very far next year. And that division is already so stacked with Russell Wilson now coming in. That team needs all the help they can get if they want to compete. With the 18th overall pick, I have the New Orleans Saints selecting Christian Watson, a wide receiver from North Dakota State University. Watson, I think, has been the biggest riser for wide receivers this year. He's 6'4", and he came out during the combine and ran extremely fast for his size. He performed really well at the Senior Bowl, which got a lot of eyes on him. And then, like I said, the combine, he did amazing. So the Saints, I have the Saints taking him simply because they don't know for sure what's happening with Michael Thomas. And outside of Michael Thomas, they don't really have a lot at receiver anyways. I don't think Traquan Smith is a number 1 receiver. So bringing a guy like Watson, who has legit 4.36 speed, 4.38 speed at 6'4", he can really help that team get to where they were a couple years ago. Obviously, they need to figure out quarterback, but I think they're going to be bringing back Jameis Winston. So I think Watson could be a really big piece for Jameis Winston next year. With the 19th overall pick, I have the Philadelphia Eagles selecting Zion Johnson, an offensive lineman from Boston College. This offseason, Brandon Brooks retired for the Eagles, which leaves a massive hole at that right guard position. So Zion Johnson came out, dominated the bench press, dominated the combine. So I think he goes in and he instantly slides into that starting guard spot and can really help pave the way for a running back like Miles Sanders and for a team that really loves to run the ball like the Philadelphia Eagles. So I think this might be a little early for Zion Johnson, but with what he did at the combine and with the Philadelphia Eagles needing an interior offensive lineman now, I think this pick is a no-brainer. At number 20, I have the Pittsburgh Steelers selecting Malik Willis, a quarterback from Liberty. I've heard talks that the Steelers really, really like Willis, and he's been their quarterback throughout the whole process. I think they're quarterback away, maybe, depending on what they do this offseason, but I think their biggest need is quarterback, and with him going out and doing really well at the combine and looking really good all offseason, bring in Malik Willis. I think pairing him with a coach like Mike Tomlin can really help his development and can really help that team. I don't know how ready he is to be a starter day one, but I think he's a better starting option than a guy like Mason Rudolph. At pick 21, I have the New England Patriots selecting Kaiir Elam, a cornerback from Florida. It was reported earlier that the New England Patriots are letting J.C. Jackson hit free agency, which blows my mind. I think he's one of the best corners in the league, and they're just letting him go. That doesn't mean they're not going to make an effort to re-sign him, but other teams are going to offer him really, really big contracts that I don't know the Patriots will be able to offer. So I think bringing in a guy like Kaiir Elam, who's a taller cornerback, and then came out and did really well during the combine, ran really fast, looked really good. I think he goes in and he instantly slides into that number one corner spot, especially if J.C. Jackson doesn't get re-signed in free agency. If he doesn't get re-signed, the team's going to need cornerback really bad, and Kaiir Elam could be that number one guy. Pick 22, I have the Las Vegas Raiders selecting Treylon Burks, wide receiver from Arkansas, once looked at a couple weeks ago as probably the best receiver in this draft, or the guy who was going to go first, regardless of who was the best receiver. He didn't have a great combine by any means. He actually looked really, really bad. And with certain receivers coming out and performing extremely well during the combine, I think that only pushed Treylon Burks farther down the board. And with the Raiders really needing a number one receiver, because I don't think they have a number one receiver on that roster. Obviously, the whole Henry Ruggs mess, and then Deshaun Jackson is getting old, can't really be relied on. Bring in a guy like Treylon Burks, who really gives Derek Carr a reliable weapon on the outside to go along with a guy like Darren Waller and then Josh Jacobs in the backfield. I think if they can get him and potentially sign someone in free agency like Marquez Valdes-Scantling, just get weapons to put around Derek Carr, especially if that team wants to make it back to the playoffs again. At pick 23, I have the Arizona Cardinals selecting David Ojabo, an edge from Michigan. David Ojabo is another guy like Aiden Hutchinson who destroyed during the regular season this year, was outstanding, and then he came in and did really, really good at the combine. And for Arizona, a team that could potentially be losing Chandler Jones, they need to bring in another defensive end if they want to keep competing, because who knows what's going to happen with them and Kyler Murray. So their window may be slowly closing. And I think bringing in Ojabo, who could really learn from a guy like J.J. Watt, could really help his development. I think that's a really smart move for them. He's extremely athletic, so he could be a top defensive end for them for years to come. At pick 24, I have the Dallas Cowboys selecting Tyler Linderbaum, a center from Iowa. He's probably the best center in the draft, if not the best interior offensive lineman overall. He is a bit undersized, which may hurt him going into the draft. But a team like Dallas, who's ever since Travis Frederick retired a couple years ago due to injuries, I don't think they've really had that number one center that they can rely on and that they want. I think they have Tyler Biadasz right now, but he's not that great. I think if Tyler Linderbaum is available at 24, you run that card up to the commissioner and you thank the gods that you got him. And I think it's kind of a situation like with CeeDee Lamb and Micah Parsons just kind of falling into the Cowboys' laps. So kind of looking at this, it's the rich get richer. They don't know how many years they have left of Zach Martin or Tyron Smith. So get a young offensive lineman that you can build around and can rely on for 10 to 15 years. I think the Cowboys would be really stupid to not take him at this spot. At pick 25, I have the Buffalo Bills selecting Andrew Booth Jr., a cornerback from Clemson. Now, Booth does have a quad injury that hindered him from competing at the combine and may hinder him from competing at his pro day, which if he doesn't compete, he might not even be able to go in, or he might not even go in the first round just because he doesn't have a lot of offseason stuff for teams to look at. I still think he's a really good corner. I think he'd go into Buffalo and he'd be a really solid and reliable piece alongside Tre'Davious White, who the argument can be made as one of the best cornerbacks in the league. And for Buffalo, who wants to compete right now and can compete right now, they need to get a cornerback that they can rely on if someone like Tre'Davious White goes down like he did this past season. At pick 26, I have the Tennessee Titans selecting Desmond Ridder, a quarterback from Cincinnati. Now, Ridder, I don't think is an amazing quarterback, but he's really athletic, fast, and I think he's really good mentally. Like, he's not shaken very easily, if that makes sense. He didn't perform terrible against Alabama in the college football playoffs, and he performed really well at the combine this year. And for Tennessee, who has Ryan Tannehill, I think they might be looking to potentially get rid of him after this year. I think he's 34 or 30, 33 or 34 this year, so he is getting up there in age, and I think he is a little bit limited in what he can do at this age. So they won't be able to get rid of him this year, but bring in Ridder, who can sit behind Ryan Tannehill for a year, learn, and then next year, if they trade or release Tannehill, they'll have Ridder hopefully ready to go in and be their starting quarterback. At pick 27, I have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers selecting Tyler Smith, an offensive lineman from Tulsa. Now, going into the combine, I had never really heard of Tyler Smith, but he came out and did really, really well at the combine, really boosted his draft stock. And with the Buccaneers losing Ali Marpet and potentially losing Ryan Jensen and Alex Kappa, which would leave them barren in the middle of that offensive line, bringing in a guy like Tyler Smith, who will probably be a starter day one for the Buccaneers, and can learn and develop and grow alongside a guy like Tristan Wirfs, who is arguably the best right tackle in the league right now. The Buccaneers, who could potentially be a quarterback away still if they get their offensive line figured out, I think Tyler Smith would be a perfect fit for the Bucs. At pick 28, I have the Green Bay Packers selecting Nakobe Dean, a linebacker for Georgia. Green Bay signed Devondre Campbell this past year for basically nothing, and then he came out and had a first team All-Pro season, performed really well, and with that, I don't know if Green Bay will be able to keep him. I think other teams are probably going to overpay him simply for what he did do this year. Now, if Green Bay does re-sign Campbell, I don't know how likely this pick is, but Nakobe Dean is arguably the best linebacker in this entire draft. He has sideline-to-sideline speed and was arguably the best defensive player on that Georgia Bulldogs team. So for Green Bay, a team that could potentially lose Chris Barnes this offseason too, I think they need to bring in a linebacker like Dean, who can help be the captain of that defense and who they can rely on to get the job done, bring calls in, and can just really improve the ceiling of that defense and help a team that has a potentially closing Super Bowl window with Aaron Rodgers recently coming back. At pick 29, I have the Miami Dolphins selecting Kenneth Walker III, a running back from Michigan State. Now, this is the first and only running back I have going in this first round mock draft. I don't really see it being super likely that any running back goes, but I think Kenneth Walker, who put up crazy numbers this past year and then came out and did really well at the combine. I think the Miami Dolphins, who don't have any running backs that I really trust on their roster, would be foolish not to draft a guy like Kenneth Walker. He'll probably fall and end up being in the second round, but if I'm the Dolphins, I get a guy like Kenneth Walker who can catch out of the backfield and who can run really well, and put him with Jalen Waddle, put him with Mike Gesicki and Tua Tagovailoa, and you potentially have a really good young core to build around for years to come. At pick 30, I have the Kansas City Chiefs drafting George Karlaftis, an edge from Purdue. I don't know why I still have him at 30. He's one of the best edge rushers in this draft class. Came out, performed really well at the combine. And I mean, the Chiefs need defensive ends. Frank Clark has got to go. He's getting paid way too much to do really all he's doing, and he's not doing a whole lot. Then they can move Chris Jones back to defensive tackle. And then overall, I think that defense will be a lot better. They can have George Karlaftis for years to come. I'm not going to compare him to Jared Allen, but I think he could come in and have an impact on that defensive line like Jared Allen did in the early 2000s. So I think the Chiefs would be foolish to not take a guy like Karlaftis if he is available at pick 30. At pick 31, I have the Cincinnati Bengals selecting Kenyon Green, an offensive lineman from Texas A&M. Now, Green's draft stock really fell during the combine because he did not perform well at all. But I don't really think that matters when he is probably the best offensive lineman still available at this point. And the Cincinnati Bengals, plain and simple, need offensive linemen. That's really all the explanation I need to give for this. They need to protect Joe Burrow, so get the best offensive lineman available to do just that. And then with the 32nd overall pick, I have the Detroit Lions selecting Matt Corral, quarterback from Ole Miss. This pick could go a lot of ways, and I don't really see Matt Corral being available at pick 32. But if I'm the Detroit Lions and Corral is still available, I pull the trigger on it. Jared Goff is not your franchise quarterback, and he shouldn't be. And they obviously can't get rid of him this year due to money reasons. So if they can get a guy like Matt Corral to come into the building, learn for a year, and then have them get rid of Goff next year and Corral comes in and starts, I think that's putting the team in a good position for the next however many years. I don't think he's a guy like Matthew Stafford, who they drafted back in 2009, but he could be similar to Stafford in the way that they'll have him for 5, 10, 15 years and can rely on him to win them games with his arm and athleticism. But I think this would be a good pick for the Lions. There's obviously a lot of good players still available, but I don't see any reason why they shouldn't take a potential future franchise quarterback if he's still on the board for them at the moment. As always, I'm your host, Parker Striha, and this has been the Striha Sports Podcast. Our random sport fact of the day is that the world record shot put was thrown by Ryan Krauser with an outstanding 22.83 meters or 74.9 feet. As always, thank you for tuning in, and don't forget to hit that notification bell for whenever a new video gets posted.